You work hard. You build a life. You buy the house. Create a sanctuary for your family. You believe you've finally achieved the American dream. But what happens when that dream becomes a nightmare? What do you do when a neighbor decides your private sanctuary belongs to the community? And what happens when your polite no is seen not as a boundary, but as a declaration of war? Welcome to Dipu Kader Stories. Tonight, we tell the story of David Henderson, a man who built his paradise, only to have an HOA Karen demand he hand over the keys. When he refused, she tried to turn the entire neighborhood against him. And when that didn't work, she made a 911 call that could have cost him everything. This isn't just a story about a swimming pool. It's about the terrifying power of privilege, and how quickly a suburban paradise can become a battlefield. The flashing lights and the fateful knock. The police lights arrived without a sound, but they screamed across the living room walls, painting the room in silent, pulsing strokes of emergency. Blue, red, blue. A violent heartbeat on the family photos lining the mantelpiece, on the spines of the books on the shelves, on the face of his wife, Maria, her skin suddenly pale and translucent in the chaos. David Henderson did not feel panic. Not yet. He felt a strange, cold clarity settle over him, the kind that arrives when the world slows to a crawl and every detail becomes sharp, focused, and terrifyingly real. Outside, a voice sliced through the quiet evening. It came from a loudspeaker, a machine's voice, cold, impersonal, stripped of all humanity. The resident of 112 Maple Lane. Please exit the house. With your hands in the air, his son, Leo, just 15 years old, stood frozen in the hallway, a statue carved from fear. The phone in his hand was shaking, a small tremor running up his arm, but the tiny red light of its camera was steady, a single, defiant eye staring into the unfolding nightmare. David met his son's wide NETO, terrified eyes, and gave a single, slow nod. A universe of meaning passed between them in that silent gesture. Stay calm. Keep recording. I'm here. Then he turned to Maria. He didn't need to speak. Her 17 years as an emergency room nurse had forged a stillness in her, a calm in the heart of any storm that he had always admired, and never needed more than now. David took a deep, steadying breath. He walked to the front door, his bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. His hand rested on the cold brass knob. For a final moment, his eyes went to the backyard, through the sliding glass doors, past the dark shapes of the patio furniture. To the hole, it was a concrete wound in the earth. A pale, gaping scar under the moonlight. The place where the water used to be. 6 weeks. That's all it had taken. 6 weeks to go from the quiet hum of the American dream to this, before the silence from neighbors who used to wave, before the whispers behind cupped hands at the grocery store, before the flashing lights painted his home in colors of dread and accusation. There was water, and there was laughter. The memory was so clear it felt like the present. A Saturday afternoon in late April. Just 6 weeks ago, the Georgia sun was a warm, gentle hand on the skin, not yet the cruel fist of midsummer. The air smelled of freshly cut grass, of chlorine, and of the rich, smoky perfume of charcoal from the grill. David stood on the patio, a heavy metal spatula in his hand, a king in his small kingdom. He watched Leo and a friend send a glorious plume of water into the air with a perfectly executed cannonball. The splash was a sound of pure joy. Maria was reading in a lounge chair, lost in a book, a tall glass of iced tea sweating onto the small table beside her. Ice clinked softly as she shifted. This was it. The culmination, the reason for the late nights at the office, the endless lines of code, the sacrifices made and the promotions earned. This small square of peace in a quiet, tree-lined suburb of Atlanta. This house, this yard, this pool, it was more than property. It was his family's sanctuary. Then came the knock. It wasn't the soft tap of a neighbor dropping by at the front door. It was at the side gate. A sharp, insistent rap of knuckles on thick wood. Not the knock of a friend. It was the knock of an official. An announcement. Her name was Carolyn Vance. She was a woman whose blonde hair was sculpted into a permanent, unmoving helmet, impervious to the Georgia humidity. Her smile was a bright, wide, well-practiced performance. But it never quite reached her eyes. She was the head of the social committee for the Maple Creek Homeowners Association, the HOA, a three-letter acronym that was supposed to mean community, order, shared values, and manicured lawns. Carolyn wore her title like a piece of invisible armor. She carried a clipboard. It seemed less an accessory and more a permanent extension of her arm, both a shield and a weapon. She began with pleasantries. She spoke of the beauty of his garden. She mentioned the perfect weather. Then her eyes, apale, searching blue, settled on the pool, on the happy chaos of the splashing children, on the sparkling, sun-drenched water. She spoke of community, of a party, a grand event for Memorial Day, a chance for everyone to come together. Her words suggested his pool was the perfect venue. She did not phrase it as a question. She presented it as a wonderful, obvious conclusion. David's answer was polite, and it was firm. No. He spoke of liability, a word that carried immense weight. He spoke of insurance policies and their many exclusions. He spoke of the simple, human desire for his family's privacy on a holiday weekend. These were practical words, sensible words, the kind of words any reasonable person would understand and accept. Carolyn's smile did not disappear. It just tightened. The skin around her eyes crinkled in a way that had nothing to do with amusement. She looked from David to his pool, and back again. In her eyes, he was no longer a neighbor. He was a problem, an obstacle. She left soon after, but not before saying one last thing, a quiet sentence that seemed to poison the warm afternoon air, hanging there long after her sensible sedan had driven away. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, as if sharing a secret. She said that in Maple Creek, they believed sharing was how everyone integrated. Integrate. The word echoed in the sudden quiet of the backyard. The joyful shouts from the pool seemed to fade. The sun felt a little colder on his skin. And David Henderson, standing alone at his gate, had the distinct and chilling feeling that he had not just refused a simple request, he had been given a warning. The digital battlefield. The warning lingered. It did not fade with the setting sun or the chirping of the evening cicadas. It settled into the quiet corners of the house. A low, humming anxiety that vibrated just beneath the surface of their everyday lives. For 2 days, there was nothing. A fragile, manufactured peace returned. David began to wonder if he had imagined the coldness in Carolyn's tone, if he had overreacted to a simple, awkward social request. He almost convinced himself that it was over. Then his phone buzzed. It was a private message from a neighbor a few streets over. A man he shared polite, distant nods with while walking the dog. The message was short, cryptic, and it was anonymous. You might want to look at the Maple Creek Neighbors group on Facebook. There was no other explanation. None was needed. David's heart sank a little. He knew this platform. It was a place for lost dogs, recommendations for plumbers, and cheerful announcements about neighborhood yard sales. But he also knew it could be something else. A digital town square where pleasantries veiled judgment. He found the post easily. It was near the top of the page, already blooming with dozens of likes and a growing chain of comments. Carolyn had written it. Of course, his name was not mentioned, not once. The attack was far more subtle. And for that, far more venomous. The post began with a cheerful, almost bubbly note about the upcoming Memorial Day party. It praised the many volunteers by name. It celebrated the wonderful spirit of the community. Then, after the curtain of positivity, the tone shifted. A single paragraph aimed like a carefully calibrated rifle. It's so heartwarming to see so many people willing to contribute. This shows the true, generous spirit of Maple Creek. Just a small thought for everyone to consider. A strong community is built on giving, not just on taking. It is about sharing our blessings with our neighbors, not hoarding them behind our fences. The words were simple. On the surface, they were innocent, but David felt them land like small, sharp stones in his gut. Hoarding, fences. The language was deliberate. She was painting him as a dragon, sitting on a treasure he refused to share. And, judging by the reaction, everyone knew exactly which dragon she meant. He scrolled through the comments, his thumb moving numbly over the cold glass screen. Well said, Carolyn. Some people forget what being a good neighbor means. This was from a woman he'd chatted with at the last block party. It's about respect for the community. Some people think the rules don't apply to them. This from a man whose children played on the same soccer team as Leo. One woman, a newer resident he didn't recognize, tried to offer a different perspective. Her comment was cautious, a quiet voice in the growing chorus. I'm sure everyone has their own reasons. Privacy is important too, isn't it? She was immediately shut down. The replies were swift and sharp, like wasps descending. That's not what community is about. And maybe this neighborhood isn't the right fit for people who think that way. It was a thinly veiled threat. Conform, or be cast out. The digital pitchforks were out, and they were all pointing in his direction. Maria came and stood behind him, resting her chin on his shoulder as she often did. She read the screen over his head. Her 17 years in the emergency room had given her a unique immunity to panic. She did not gasp. She did not get angry. She simply sighed. It was not a sigh of fear. It was a sigh of profound, soul-deep weariness. Don't you dare reply, she said softly, her breath warm against his ear. Her voice was the calm center in his rising storm. Don't even think about it. That's the trap. David, she wants you to get angry. She wants you to defend yourself so she can twist your words. You can't win a game where they get to make all the rules. He knew she was right, but the silence felt heavy. It felt like an admission of guilt he did not possess. The digital chill soon bled into the real world, staining the edges of his life. The next morning, while walking their beagle, Buster, he saw Mrs. Miller from across the street tending to her prize-winning petunias. Normally, she would give a wide, friendly wave, a greeting that was part of the morning's reliable rhythm. Today, her eyes met his for a fraction of a second before she suddenly found a single, tiny patch of weeds that required her immediate, urgent attention. She turned her back to him, her shoulders stiff. Later, at the grocery store, he was in the dairy aisle, reaching for a carton of milk. He overheard two women talking in the next aisle, their voices low, conspiratorial whispers. He recognized them from the neighborhood. He couldn't hear every word, but he caught the phrases "the pool" and "so selfish." The moment they saw him round the corner, the conversation stopped. Abruptly, their smiles were tight and unnatural, stretched thin across their faces. The war was not being fought with shouts and threats. It was being fought with averted eyes, with sudden, deafening silences, with the cold, quiet judgment of a community that had already tried and convicted him, all from the comfort and safety of their keyboards. That evening, David and Maria sat in their living room. The television was off. The only sound was the low, electric hum of the refrigerator. The silence between them wasn't comfortable. It was heavy, weighed down by unspoken words and the new, suffocating awareness that the walls of their home their sanctuary, were no longer impenetrable. The world, with its ugly little judgments, had found a way in. The Unwanted Delegation. The silence of the online world was not an ending. It was a prelude, a gathering of storm clouds. Carolyn, feeling the wind of manufactured public opinion at her back, decided it was time to press her advantage. The next escalation did not arrive via a glowing screen. It arrived in the flesh. On his doorstep, the doorbell rang on a Tuesday evening. Just as they were clearing the dinner table, it was a sharp, confident chime. 2 notes that sliced through the domestic peace. It was not the casual ring of a friend. It was the ring of someone on a mission. David opened the door to a carefully arranged scene, a living tableau of intimidation. Carolyn stood in the center, her posture perfect, her clipboard held against her chest like a shield, a general surveying the field. To her right stood Bob Schmidt. Bob was a retired accountant who had seamlessly transitioned his passion for spreadsheets to the bylaws of the Homeowners Association. He was a man who carried a small, leather-bound notebook and a retractable tape measure in his pocket at all times. He was a man whose greatest joys seemed to come from citing residents for grass that was a 1/4 inch too high, or a mailbox painted in a non-approved shade of semi-gloss beige. For Bob, the rules were not guidelines. They were sacred scripture. To Carolyn's left stood Eleanor Paris. Eleanor was a quiet, nervous woman with worried eyes, who seemed to live in the permanent shadow of Carolyn's confidence. She joined committees not out of a desire for power, but out of a deep-seated, palpable fear of being excluded. She was a follower, a reliable vote, and Carolyn knew it. They were a delegation, unwanted, uninvited, and utterly transparent. "Good evening, David," Carolyn began, her voice smooth and practiced, like a television news anchor. It was the voice of someone who believed they held all the cards, who had already determined the outcome of the conversation. "We are here this evening as representatives of the Homeowners Association. It has come to our attention that several concerns have been raised by residents regarding a lack of participation in community activities." David's well of politeness had finally run dry. It had been eroded away by the whispers and the cold shoulders and the judgmental silence of his neighbors. He looked past Carolyn, his gaze moving deliberately to her 2 companions. He addressed Bob first, his voice even. "Is that why you're here?" "Bob, to tell me what I should be doing with my own backyard." Bob Schmidt, a man usually so bold when pointing out a misplaced garbage can on a Thursday morning, could not meet his gaze. He cleared his throat, a dry, rustling sound, and found a sudden, intense interest in the intricate pattern of the welcome mat beneath his feet. David then turned his attention to Eleanor. "And you, Eleanor, do you have a concern you'd like to share with me personally?" Eleanor flinched as if he had shouted. She looked to Carolyn, a quick, panicked glance. As if searching for a script, she mumbled something incoherent about community spirit. Her eyes fixed on a tiny crack in the pavement. They were not representatives. They were props in Carolyn's stage play. His focus, cold and sharp, returned to Carolyn. His voice was low, steady, and stripped of all its previous warmth. It was the voice of a man who had been pushed too far. "My answer 2 weeks ago was no. My answer today is no. And if you come to my property again regarding this matter, I will consider it harassment." He paused, letting the weight of each word settle in the humid evening air between them. "This conversation," he said, with a chilling, absolute finality, "is over." He did not slam the door. He closed it. Firmly, quietly, the solid, definitive click of the latch was louder than any shout could ever be. He leaned his forehead against the cool wood of the door, his heart pounding in his chest, not with fear, but with a cold, hard anger. He had drawn a line. Through the heavy oak door, he heard Carolyn's voice. It was no longer smooth. It was sharp and brittle with unconcealed fury. You have made a great mistake. Mr. Henderson, she called out, her voice muffled, but her meaning perfectly. Poisonously clear. You will find that going against this community has a cost. Carolyn's threat was no longer an insinuation. It was clear and cold. A promise delivered on his doorstep. David had drawn a line in the sand, but Carolyn seemed determined to cross it, no matter the price. Faced with an escalation like this, is resolve enough? If you were in his shoes, what would you have done to protect your family's peace? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss part 4, where David makes a decision that will change everything. The weight of water. Carolyn's threat did not just hang in the air, it seeped through the door and into the very fabric of the house. It settled over the family like a fine, invisible layer of dust, dulling the colors of their life. The house was still their home. 4 walls and a roof. But it no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a fortress. A place under constant, silent siege. David watched the change happen in small, heartbreaking ways that twisted something deep inside him. He saw the way Maria, a woman who faced life and death situations with unshakable calm, would now jump every time a car slowed down out front. He saw how Leo, his bright, sociable son, chose to stay in his room with the door closed, lost in the digital worlds of video games. Instead of inviting friends over to splash in the pool, the effortless joy that had once filled their backyard had been drained away, replaced by a quiet, heavy vigilance. The pool, once the vibrant, turquoise heart of their home, was now a silent, shimmering monument to the conflict. It was beautiful, yes, but it was a cold beauty now. It reflected a strained sky, a worried family. One evening, David and Maria sat on the patio, the underwater lights of the pool cast weaving, ghostly patterns on their faces and the walls of the house. The water was beautiful, but it felt heavy, burdened with unspoken tension. They sat without speaking for a long time. The only sound, the rhythmic chirping of crickets. Finally, David broke the silence. His voice was barely a whisper, a sound meant only for her. I used to think this was our paradise, Maria. Now, it feels like a fishbowl, and she never stops tapping on the glass. The moment that finally broke him, however, came a few days later. It was a perfect Saturday. Hot and sunny. The kind of day the pool was made for, but Leo and his best friend were in the yard, tossing a football back and forth on the grass. Their movements were listless. The pool sat untouched, its surface as smooth and still as a pane of blue glass. David walked out, forcing a smile that felt brittle and fake. Hey, guys, water's perfect today. Why aren't you swimming? Leo stopped, clutching the football to his chest. He wouldn't look at his father. He just shrugged, his eyes suddenly fascinated by the scuff marks on his sneakers. I don't know, he said, his voice quiet, almost lost in the open air. It's not fun anymore. Dad? He paused, and then he added the 6 simple words that would shatter David's resolve into 1,000 pieces. It feels like someone's watching. It was a punch to the gut. The simple, honest, devastating truth from his son. The pool, the symbol of his hard work, the very place of his family's joy, had been poisoned. It was no longer a source of happiness. It was a source of anxiety, a constant, watery reminder of their neighbor's relentless hostility. That night, long after Leo was asleep, David sat down with Maria in the quiet of their kitchen. The only light came from the small lamp over the sink, casting long shadows. He did not talk about Carolyn. He did not talk about the HOA, or the neighbors, or the fight. He only talked about their son. I cannot let him grow up feeling watched and judged in his own home, he said, his voice thick with an emotion that was equal parts anger and heartbreak. I cannot let his summer memories be tainted and stolen by one person's hatred. He won't. He looked at Maria, his decision already made, reflected deep in his tired eyes. I'm going to drain it. Maria was not surprised. She had seen the weight he was carrying for weeks. She had felt it too. A heavy cloak over their lives. She simply reached across the cool kitchen table and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm, steady, and absolute. I know, she said softly. Her agreement was a quiet, powerful blessing. It's just water. David, our peace is more important. Later that night, long after the last lights in the neighborhood had gone out, David stepped out into the still, dark backyard. He moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose. There were no angry words. There was no theatrical display of defiance. He simply uncoiled the long, heavy drainage hose from its reel. He connected one end to the submersible pump, its metal casing cold in his hands, and lowered it into the deep end of the pool until it touched the bottom. The other end he ran to the storm drain at the side of the house, a dark opening into the earth. His hand hesitated for only a second over the switch on the power cord. He thought of the laughter, the cannonballs, the pure, uncomplicated joy. Then he thought of his son's face, the shadow in his eyes, and his hand was steady. He flipped the switch. A single, decisive click broke the silence of the night. It was followed by the low, steady hum of the pump kicking into life. A sound that was both an ending and a beginning under the pale, indifferent glow of the moon. A stream of water, their captured piece of paradise, began to flow away into the darkness. The hollow victory. The low hum of the pump had ceased sometime in the dead of night. Morning arrived with an unfamiliar silence in the backyard. The air, usually filled with the gentle sound of the filter and the whisper of water, was now perfectly still. David sat on his patio, a warm mug of coffee cupped in his hands. He looked out at the result of his decision. The pool was a vast, empty concrete basin. Its white plaster floor, now exposed to the air, looked strangely vulnerable under the soft morning sun. A few scattered leaves lay at the bottom of the deep end, like forgotten relics from another time. It was not beautiful. Not yet. But for the first time in weeks, David felt like he could breathe. The constant, low-grade pressure in his chest had eased. This empty space was not a symbol of defeat. It was a symbol of peace. A hard-won, hollowed-out peace. His quiet moment was shattered by a sound from the street. The brisk, determined footsteps of Carolyn Vance on her morning power walk. He watched as she drew even with his property line. She stopped. Abruptly, her head snapped toward his backyard, her body freezing mid-stride. For a long moment, she just stared, her mouth slightly agape, as if her mind was refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. The perfectly manicured lawn, the neat patio furniture, and then the void. The disbelief on her face quickly curdled into rage. She did not knock. She did not use the gate's latch. She shoved it open with such force that it slammed against the fence with a loud crack. She marched across his lawn, her expensive sneakers leaving imprints in the dewy grass, her face a mask of furious indignation. "What have you done?" she demanded, her voice sharp, trembling with fury. She jabbed a finger toward the empty pool, as if accusing him of a crime. "Are you insane? This is vandalism. This is a waste." David did not stand up. He did not raise his voice. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his coffee. Letting the warmth spread through him, he looked at this angry, sputtering woman, and for the first time, he did not feel intimidated or annoyed. He felt a strange, detached sense of pity. Her power, her only source of leverage, was gone. drained away with the water. He finally lowered his mug and met her gaze. His voice was calm, quiet, and utterly final. "No, Carolyn," he said, his tone even. "This is maintenance, a very long-term maintenance project." She opened her mouth, then closed it again, sputtering. There were no rules in the HOA bylaws about draining one's own pool. There was nothing for her to cite. No violation for Bob Schmidt to measure. She had no authority here. Her entire campaign had been built around a prize that no longer existed. Hianga, finding no purchase, turned into a frustrated, impotent hiss. She spun on her heel and stormed away, slamming the gate behind her. The victory felt hollow. There was no joy in it, only a profound sense of relief. Later that morning, David took his final step to reclaim the narrative. He walked down into the empty, echoing space of his former pool. He stood at the bottom of the deep end and took a photo, aiming his phone straight up at the wide, open Georgia sky. The composition was artistic, almost abstract. A circle of blue framed by curving white walls. He posted it to the Maple Creek Neighbors Facebook group. The caption he wrote was simple. It was cheerful. It was relentlessly positive. Ready for a fresh start, decided to turn this space into something new for the family. Any ideas for a sunken garden? The post was a strategic masterstroke. It was an act of creation, not destruction. It was about family, about home improvement. It was utterly, completely unassailable. How could anyone criticize a man for wanting to plant a garden for his family? The reaction online was immediate, and it was profound. Silence. The very same platform that had buzzed with veiled accusations and judgmental comments just days before was now completely quiet. No likes. No supportive emojis for Carolyn. No angry comments. Nothing. The silence was deafening. It was a collective, unspoken admission from the community. They had participated in a petty, ugly campaign. And now, seeing the final, drastic result, they were ashamed. The silence was their verdict. And it was not in Carolyn's favor. In her own quiet kitchen a few streets away, Carolyn Vance stared at the image on her phone. The picture of the empty pool, the cheerful, innocent caption, the crushing, absolute silence from her so-called supporters. She had not just been defied. She had been beaten. She had been made to look foolish. Her crusade revealed for what it was, a petty obsession. Humiliation burned in her cheeks. A hot, bitter poison. She had lost, but in her mind, twisted by rage and a lifetime of unchecked privilege, failure was not an end. It was a reason to escalate, a reason to use a much more powerful weapon. Her hand, trembling with a new, dangerous resolve, slid across the screen of her phone. Her finger hovered over the green icon, the one with the small white telephone. She knew exactly what to say. The 911 call. Night fell on Maple Creek. The streetlights cast pools of lonely, orange light onto the empty sidewalks. Inside most homes, families were settling in. Televisions were on. Dishes were being washed. The quiet, ordinary rhythm of suburban life played out, but not in Carolyn Vance's house. She sat in the darkness of her kitchen, a single glass of white wine untouched on the granite countertop beside her. The only light came from the world outside, filtering through the window over her sink. From this vantage point, she had a clear, if distant, view of the Hendersons' backyard. For hours, she had been watching, waiting, fueling the fire of her humiliation with a steady drip of resentment. She saw the patio light flick on. She saw the shapes of David and his son, Leo, move about near the empty pool. They were putting away tools. It seemed, coiling a hose. A simple, domestic chore, but in Carolyn's mind, the scene transformed into something sinister. Her thoughts, a venomous internal monologue, began to spin a new narrative. What are they doing out there in the dark, she thought, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the counter. Scheming. That's what they're doing. He destroyed the centerpiece of this community. He did it just to spite me, to make me look like a fool. Her mind raced, connecting imaginary dots into a terrifying picture of her own creation. He defied the HOA. He defied his neighbors. He defied me. A man like that, who knows what else he's capable of? He's unstable. He's aggressive. The word felt right in her mouth. Aggressive. It was the perfect word. It explained everything. It justified everything. She was not a bully who had been put in her place. No, she was a vigilant neighbor, a protector of the community's values. She was the victim here. She felt a surge of self-righteousness. She was not acting out of spite. She was acting out of fear. A noble, necessary fear. She picked up her phone. Her hand was perfectly steady now. Her purpose was clear. In her mind, this was not a petty act of revenge. It was a civic duty. She was restoring order. She pressed the call button. The voice on the other end was calm. Professional. 911. What is your emergency? Carolyn took a shaky, theatrical breath, summoning a performance worthy of an award. Hair voice, when she spoke, was a quivering whisper of manufactured terror. Hello, I'm not sure if this is an emergency. She began, planting the seed of reluctant heroism. But I'm very scared. There's a man in my neighbor's yard, and he's acting very strangely, very aggressively. The operator's tone remained level. Ma'am, can you describe aggressively for me? This was her moment. She closed her eyes, picturing David's calm, defiant face, and she painted her masterpiece of deceit. He's shouting. She lied, the words sliding out with astonishing ease. He's shouting and I hear banging sounds, like he's breaking things. He's a very large, intimidating man, a black man, and I'm a single woman here. I'm alone. I'm terrified he might try to come over here. It was a symphony of calculated, weaponized words. She had added shouting to create urgency. She had added the sound of breaking things to suggest destruction of property. And, most despicably, she had added his race, knowing it was a powerful, dangerous amplifier in the grammar of fear. She had described not what she saw, but what she wanted the police to see: an angry, dangerous black man. The operator's voice sharpened with a new urgency. Okay, Mom, we're dispatching officers to that location right now. Please stay inside and lock your doors. Thank you. Carolyn breathed, as if a great weight had been lifted. Thank you so much. She ended the call. For a long moment, she just stood there in the darkness, the phone still clutched in her hand. A faint, triumphant smile touched her lips. She had done it. The power was hers again. She had taken the board, flipped it over, and rewritten the rules of the game to suit her. She walked to her front window, pulled back the edge of the curtain, and waited for the flashing lights that would signal the restoration of her world. The story was now back where it belonged, circling back to its violent, inevitable beginning. A loop of her own making. The reckoning. The flashing lights arrived, just as she had willed them. They returned the story to its beginning. But the ending would not be the one Carolyn had written. David stood on his own front porch, hands held high in a gesture of surrender he did not feel. Bathed in the accusatory red and blue glow, two officers stood on the lawn, their stances wide, their hands resting near their holstered weapons. One was older, a man with tired eyes and a thick mustache whose name tag read Mendez. The other was younger, more tense, his name tag reading Chen. Sir, Officer Mendez began, his voice calm but firm. a practice sound designed to de-escalate. We received a report of a disturbance. Shouting. Destruction of property. Officers, David said, his own voice miraculously steady. He lowered his hands slowly. Deliberately. You can hear for yourself. It's a quiet night. My son and I were in the backyard, putting away some gardening tools. That's all. From across the street, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Carolyn, unable to resist watching her masterpiece unfold. He's lying, she shouted, her voice shrill, cutting through the tense quiet. I heard him. He was in a rage. It was at that moment that Leo, who had been standing just inside the doorway, stepped forward. He was still holding his phone, the red recording light still on. His voice was trembling, but it was clear. That's not true, he said. Addressing the officers, I've been recording since you got here. Nobody was shouting, except for her. Just now, Officer Mendez's eyes flickered from David's calm face to Leo's phone, and then to Carolyn's agitated form across the street. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place in his experienced mind. He had seen this kind of call before. It had a name, it had a smell, and it was ugly. He gestured for David to follow him to the side of the house. Officer Chen followed. They walked around the gate to the backyard. They stopped at the edge of the empty pool, the white concrete glowing under the security light. This is the destruction of property, I assume Mendez asked, his tone now carrying a distinct note of skepticism. This is my pool, which I drained 2 days ago. David explained evenly. He recounted the story, not with anger, but with a weary, factual precision. He spoke of the HOA, the party, the online harassment, the delegation on his doorstep, the effect it had on his son. He laid out the facts, one by one, like stones in a foundation. Carolyn, seeing her narrative slipping away, pushed through the gate, ignoring Officer Chen's command to stay back. Don't listen to him. He's manipulative. He's the one who has been terrorizing this neighborhood. Officer Mendez turned to face her. His tired eyes were now hard as steel. Ma'am, he said, his voice dropping low, losing all its professional patience. Did you or did you not report hearing this man shouting and breaking things just minutes ago? Yes, I did. I was scared for my life, she insisted, her voice rising in pitch. Mendez gestured to the quiet, orderly backyard, to the calm father and his son, and yet, we find no evidence of any disturbance. What we do have is a teenager's video recording showing a quiet scene, and what we have is you, ma'am, creating the only disturbance here. The confident mask on Carolyn's face began to crumble. Panic flickered in her eyes. But I felt threatened, ma'am, Mendez said, cutting her off, his voice sharp with finality. Do you have any idea how dangerous it is to file a false police report? You put this family in danger. You put my officers in danger. You used 911 as your own personal weapon. By now, several neighbors had emerged onto their own porches. Drawn by the silent, flashing lights, they stood in the shadows, listening. They heard the officer's words. They saw Carolyn, exposed and sputtering. Under the harsh glare of the police flashlight, they saw David and Leo Henderson, standing together, not as aggressors, but as victims. The play was over. The audience finally understood who the real villain was. We are done here, Mendez said to David, giving him a slight, almost imperceptible nod of respect. He then turned his full attention back to Carolyn. You, on the other hand, ma'am, don't go anywhere. We need to have a longer conversation. The police lights were switched off, plunging the street back into a heavy silence. But nothing was the same. The truth had been revealed under the harshest of lights. If you are still listening, please help me by commenting the number 1 below, so I know that I still have friends accompanying me on this journey. Your presence is the greatest encouragement for me to continue telling the final part, to see the ultimate consequences for Carolyn. And the lesson the entire community of Maple Creek had to learn. Thank you so much. The aftermath. The departure of the police cars left behind a silence that was heavier than any sound. The streetlights of Maple Creek seemed to burn a little dimmer. The confrontation was over. But the fallout was just beginning. News in a suburb like theirs traveled not like a wildfire, but like a slow, seeping fog. It moved through hushed phone calls, through text messages exchanged between neighbors, through conversations held in low voices over fences. The story that emerged was not the one Carolyn had tried to write. It was the one witnessed by the neighbors who had stood on their porches in the dark. The story of a false accusation. The story of a family endangered. Carolyn Vance became a ghost in her own neighborhood. Her morning power walks ceased. Her car remained parked in her driveway for days at a time. The newspapers delivered to her doorstep began to pile up, their plastic sleeves growing damp with morning dew, a public testament to her isolation. The very community she had sought to command now turned its collective back on her. When she was seen, fleetingly, getting her mail, neighbors who had once eagerly sought her approval would suddenly become fascinated by a cloud in the sky, or find an urgent need to check their phones. They did not confront her. They did not shout. They simply erased her with their silence. It was a quieter, colder version of the same weapon she had once wielded against David. For the Henderson family, there was no celebration. There was no sense of triumph. There was only a profound, bone-deep exhaustion, followed by a slow, tentative return to peace. The tension that had held their shoulders rigid for weeks began to unwind. The house started to feel like a home again, not a fortress. About a week after the incident, their doorbell rang one evening. David's first instinct was still a flicker of apprehension, a ghost of the anxiety that had lived with him for so long. But when he opened the door, it wasn't Carolyn. It was Bob Schmidt, the rule enforcer, the man with the notebook. He stood on the porch, twisting the brim of a baseball cap in his hands, his gaze fixed firmly on his own shoes. He looked smaller without Carolyn beside him. Henderson, he mumbled, clearing his throat. I just wanted to say I was wrong. He finally lifted his head, and David saw not malice in his eyes, but a deep, genuine shame. To come here with her that night, to be a part of that, it went too far. I'm sorry. It was not a grand speech. It was a simple, awkward apology from a man who was not used to admitting fault. For David, it was a small but significant moment of healing, a sign that the community was beginning to correct itself. I appreciate that, Bob, David said, and he meant it. Thank you. The official correction came a few days later. An email was sent out to every resident of Maple Creek Estates. The subject line was stark: urgent HOA board meeting announcement. The meeting itself was held behind closed doors, but the result was made public in a formal letter, printed on thick, cream-colored paper, that arrived in every mailbox. The letter was carefully worded. It spoke of recent events and the re-evaluation of committee leadership roles, but the message was clear. Carolyn Vance had been formally removed from her position as head of the social committee and from all other HOA duties, effective immediately. The letter concluded with a formal, public apology to the Henderson family for the unwarranted distress they had experienced. The war was officially over. The empty pool remained. For weeks, it was just a concrete hole in the ground. But then, one Saturday morning, David, Maria, and Leo went to the local nursery. They came back with bags of soil, terracotta pots of all sizes, and a collection of young, hopeful-looking plants. They began to work together. They did not try to fill the hole. They embraced it. They carried the heavy pots down the built-in steps, arranging them on the different levels of what used to be the shallow and deep ends. They filled them with rich, dark soil. They planted herbs and tomatoes and bright, cheerful marigolds. They were turning a place of conflict into a place of growth. They were transforming the symbol of their ordeal into something new, something that was entirely their own. It was not a victory garden. It was a peace garden, a quiet, living testament to their resilience and to their reclamation of home. The Unspoken Lesson. Summer softened into fall. The relentless Georgia heat gave way to cool, crisp mornings and golden afternoons. The leaves on the oak trees that lined Maple Lane turned from green to fiery shades of orange and red. In the Hendersons' backyard, their new sunken garden was thriving. The tomato plants were heavy with fruit. The scent of basil and mint hung in the air. The bright faces of the marigolds turned towards the autumn sun. David sat on his patio, a steaming mug of coffee in his hands, and looked out at their creation. He did not feel anger anymore when he looked at the space. He did not feel the ghost of anxiety. He felt a deep, quiet sense of peace. He thought about the long, difficult journey of the past few months. There had been no parade, no grand moment of victory. The resolution had been as quiet as the conflict had been loud. He had learned things he never expected to. He looked at the garden, nestled inside the hard, protective walls of the former pool, and a thought came to him, clear and simple. Water can fill a space, but it can also be drained away. Peace is like that too. Sometimes, you have to drain away the chaos to let something new have a chance to grow. He finally understood, in his bones, that protecting your boundaries isn't selfish. It is a necessary act of self-preservation. It is how you keep your own garden from being trampled. The community of Maple Creek had learned a lesson as well. The change was subtle, but it was real. The conversations at the mailbox seemed a little kinder. The waves from across the street felt a little more genuine. People were more careful with their words, both online and in person. They had seen how easily gossip could curdle into accusation, and how quickly a digital mob could cause real-world harm. They had learned about the terrible danger of silence, and the quiet courage it took to be the first one to say, "This is wrong." He thought about Carolyn. He no longer felt hatred for her, or even anger. What he felt now was a profound, aching pity. He pictured her in her quiet, lonely house, a queen without a kingdom. She hadn't really wanted a pool for a party. She had wanted control. And David had come to understand a simple truth about people like her. When someone is desperate to control everyone else around them, it's usually because they have lost control of themselves. He thought about the world we live in now, where a social media post can become a verdict, and a 911 call can be used as a weapon. He realized that in this modern world, the most powerful tools for self-defense are not always loud. Sometimes, they are quiet. Calmness in the face of accusation, the simple, unshakable truth, and, if you're lucky, a teenage son with a cell phone camera who knows when to press record. Maria stepped out onto the patio, carrying 2 mugs of tea. She handed one to him and sat down in the chair beside him. Her presence a familiar, comforting warmth. In the yard, Leo was shooting baskets at the new hoop they had installed over the garage. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the basketball on the driveway was a steady, peaceful heartbeat. No one spoke of what had happened. They didn't need to anymore. The comfortable silence between them, the steady rhythm of the basketball, and the sweet, earthy smell from their new garden was the only conversation that mattered. They were home, truly home, and that, he knew, was the only victory worth winning. David's story teaches us a powerful lesson. Our homes are more than property. They are our sanctuaries. Sometimes, protecting our peace requires not a louder voice, but a braver choice, the choice to remove the battlefield altogether. It's a reminder that true strength isn't found in winning the argument, but in reclaiming our tranquility What does the word home mean to you? I would be honored to read your thoughts in the comments. If stories like this resonate with you, perhaps you'll consider joining us here at Dipu Kader Stories. Thank you for spending your time with me today. It truly means the world